All right, guys, we continue the sessions on antidepressants. So we had covered SSRIs, we had covered SNRIs, we had covered MAO inhibitors in the previous lectures. Today we are going to talk about tricyclic antidepressants and the other antidepressants, okay, as a group. That includes mirtazapine, trazodone, vilazodone, vortioxetine, agomelatine, all of it, okay. So we'll start with the tricyclics. And before we go on to the tricyclics, I think we'll address a few general questions of antidepressants in general. You will have a lot of chatter on a lot of social media sites saying that are antidepressants any better than placebo? The answer is yes. All right. So if you have a cohort of 100 people with depression, okay, 20% will improve with no treatment at all, 30% will improve with placebo, and 50% will improve on antidepressants. All right. Please note, placebo does not mean no treatment. The placebo response, the placebo effect is a real biological, biochemical, you can add whatever terms to it. It's grounded in actual changes in the body that's happening. So placebo is not equal to no treatment. So these are the proportions of people who will improve. So that gives us a number needed to treat of 5 if you compare antidepressants with placebo, and a number needed to treat of 3 if you compare antidepressants with no treatment. Please note, the lower the number needed to treat, the higher the evidence that it is effective. That means that for every 3 patients who are treated with the drug, 1 additional patient will show a response that is attributable solely to the antidepressants. For placebo, the number needed to treat is slightly longer, is slightly larger, which means that with respect to, it has some efficacy of its own, the placebo, but still antidepressants do show effectiveness there. So this is a good way to kind of counter detractors who say antidepressants don't work or antidepressants are just a placebo response. No, we have definite evidence to kind of dispute that. All right, I have put these 2 diagrams. You know what this is? This is a network meta-analysis. And this was done, this is a very famous network meta-analysis done by Cipriani. I believe this was in 2018, if I am not mistaken. We'll get back to it. So this took around 21 of the commonly used antidepressants and kind of compared them to each other just to give us a ranking to see which antidepressant is A, more effective, and B, which antidepressant is more tolerable. So the first one is the efficacy analysis and the second one is the tolerability analysis. All right, what did this kind of tell us? This showed us that tricyclics are the number 1 in terms of efficacy. This is not a wonder because we've heard of the superiority of tricyclics in producing a response. But what was really surprising was that number 2, it was mirtazapine, which was second in terms of efficacy. Now, this would surprise a lot of us, but then people did kind of analyze the results sections, the discussion section, and they came to the conclusion that the scale that was used was Hamilton Depression Rating Scale. For people who do use the scale, they'll note that there are 3 items on sleep. There are 2 items on appetite. And so, of course, even apart from its inherent efficacy in depression with respect to low mood, anhedonia, suicidality, and cognitions, we do know that sleep and appetite are particularly impacted by TCAs and by mirtazapine. So is it really a true indicator of efficacy versus just a scale reflected finding of improved efficacy? We are not sure, but they did say that amitriptyline among the TCA and mirtazapine was the second most efficacious kind of medicine drug that was useful. So this is just kind of an overview of antidepressants. Going on to tricyclics in general, it's good to know, as I said, always I start with history, and it's good to know about the discoverers. So we have Dr. Ronald Kuhn, who was a psychiatrist. Okay, and at that time, tricyclics were being investigated as antipsychotic agents. Okay, they were similar in structure to chlorpromazine. So newer and newer drugs were being synthesized to replicate the efficacy of chlorpromazine. Amongst them was the TCA imipramine. And it had a three-ring structure, of course, but it was supposed to have lower hepatotoxicity. So people were trying to optimize the efficacy of chlorpromazine with respect to psychotic symptom suppression, but also minimize the side effects. So when Dr. Ronald Kuhn kind of tried it on his cohort of patients, he found that no, the psychosis was not getting better. In fact, in a cohort, it was even getting worse. But what he did notice was that those patients of his with schizophrenia, but who also had prominent depressive features, that depression kind of wonderfully, magically got better. And then he started work into this, and he published a series of papers, and then news of this discovery reached Canada, and then that huge kind of discovery fund was rolled into clinical trials, and they did come to the conclusion that yes, we have a newer set of compounds which are effective against depression. Please note that the first antidepressants were MAO inhibitors, but very, very closely, secondly, after that, was TCAs. With MAO inhibitors, you had iproniazide, and with TCAs, you had imipramine. Okay, so this is why history is so very important. It would also interest you to know that whereas now we are fighting over pharmacotherapy versus psychotherapy and each trying to establish which is better than the rest, it would help you to know that Ronald Kuhn, despite being so biologically based, had his leanings in psychotherapy as well, and he also advocated equal use of psychotherapy in helping patients. Especially, he was very strongly in favor of existential therapy, which he practiced himself. All right. Going to the classification of TCAs, there are a number of ways that you can classify it. The first way that we are usually aware of is tricyclics, में tertiary amines and secondary amines. Okay, and the tertiary amines are imipramine, amitriptyline, protriptyline. Okay, and in the secondary amines you have desipramine, you have nortriptyline. We do know that tertiary amines have more serotonergic effect. We do know that secondary amines have more noradrenergic effect. We do know that secondary amines are derived from the tertiary amines. So tertiary amines are prodrugs for the secondary amines, which are byproducts of their metabolism. All right, so this is one way of kind of looking at it. The other way of looking at it is to look at the chemical structure. So TCAs are three-ring structures. There are three rings in TCAs. Okay. Depending on carbon-nitrogen substitutions, you have the first ring, which is called dibenzazepines, of which imipramine is the prototype, and you have dibenzocycloheptadines, of which amitriptyline and nortriptyline are prototypes. As you can see in this classification, tertiary and secondary amines can occur within the same group. So the basis for classification is different from the one that we usually know about. Going on to the mechanism of action, very broadly, you have to think of an SNRI plus. So they have a similar mechanism of action as SNRIs, that is serotonin norepinephrine reuptake inhibitors. So similar to venlafaxine, desvenlafaxine, duloxetine, but also a number of non-target actions on other receptors. So we usually call them adverse effects. They usually cause adverse effects, all right. So SNRIs plus non-target binding. So you can have, with respect to ion channels, sodium and potassium. You can have histamine, antihistaminergic, which can cause more of sedation, weight gain. Okay, you can have anticholinergic, antimuscarinic action. So you can have constipation, dry mouth, all right, worsening of glaucoma, urinary retention. So if you just look at the non-target binding, you can, to a great extent, predict the side effect profile of the TCAs. You also have alpha-1 antagonist. So you can have dizziness, syncope, sedation, syncope, all of that happening here as well. All right. And we are usually talk of, just like with SSRIs, we usually talk of TCAs also as a uniform homogeneous group. But you must be aware that each agent within the group has different receptor binding profiles. For example, if you're looking at a more serotonergic affinity, more SERT affinity, you will have clomipramine, which is why it's used in OCD and not the other kind of TCAs. If you look at more net affinity, okay, noradrenergic affinity, then you would noradrenergic transporter inhibition affinity, you will have decipramine, okay, which is a tertiary amine. For a small proportion of these TCAs, some of them also have dopamine binding capabilities, okay, dopamine transporter binding capabilities and inhibition of it. So increase of dopamine in the limbic cortex and in the striatum, and in that you have nortriptyline. Please note, it is a secondary amine. It has more net binding than SERT binding. But amongst all the TCAs, if you look at the ones with the maximum dopamine transporter binding affinity, it would be nortriptyline. With respect to histamine, the highest kind of affinity would be for doxepine. And so doxepine is atypical in the sense it's not usually used for depression, but almost like a sedative. Okay, so its dosing would be on the lower side. You also can look at anticholinergic, antimuscarinic binding, for which amitriptyline would probably be very high up there. All right, going to the kinetics. Most of the tricyclics are very readily and absorb very fast, except protriptyline. Now, here the side effect profile works to its advantage. So, because it is anticholinergic, antimuscarinic, it slows down the intestinal transit. Okay, so it stays in the small intestine for a larger amount of time, and therefore almost a rapid and complete absorption happens. This is not the case for protriptyline, which has a longer kind of duration of absorption. It is not very rapid. It couple of hours is what is required. 6 to 8 hours or almost. Whereas for the others, it's far more faster. It is very highly protein bound. Okay, so it's highly bound to albumin, and therefore it has a high volume of distribution. It is very lipophilic. What does that indicate? If you can correlate with benzodiazepines, any lipophilic kind of agent crosses the blood-brain barrier more easily. B, it can get stored in the depots, and therefore the half-life would be longer. And so most of these tricyclics have a longer half-life, okay, except amoxapine, which can happen. The first pass metabolism, it is significantly metabolized by the liver, and so most of it is not excreted unchanged. And within the liver, there are a number of isoenzymes that can work on it. So when we are looking at CYP to C19, this pathway converts tertiary amines to their demethylated derivatives, which is the secondary amines. But when we are looking at the final pathway, which is used to metabolize both secondary and tertiary amines, this is the rate limiting step. This is by the CYP2D6 enzyme. As we have discussed before, the D6 enzyme has a huge genetic variability. So poor and extensive metabolizers will have different blood levels of the drug. So therein lies the inter-individual variability and response to the TCAs that we have discussed about. Okay, and finally, the lipophilic is converted to hydrophilic by glucuronidation, which is a phase 2 reaction. Going on to the adverse effects. When you're giving tricyclics, be very, very careful of the suicidal intention, the suicidal intent, and please do an assessment of whether it's safe to prescribe tricyclics to the patient unsupervised, because it's like giving a loaded gun. They are very prone to overdose, and that is the primary overdose related mortality, which is why you should be very careful when dispensing of them. Ideally, give it supervised if a patient has high suicidality, high suicidal intent, expressing ideas of not wanting to live anymore. So make sure that it's supervised. So you have toxicity, which is primarily should be of your mind. And when you have toxicity, we are really worried about two things: the effect of the TCAs on the brain and the effect of the TCAs on the heart. On the heart and on the brain, sodium channels, it acts on both. And in the brain, it can cause seizures. Blockade of sodium channel can cause seizures and coma. And in the heart, can cause cardiac rhythm disturbances. Okay, as I said, torsades de pointes. It even acts within the heart specifically on potassium channels, the rectifier channels. So with the sodium channels, the depolarization is affected, and here the repolarization is affected. Okay, and so this can predispose to cardiovascular events, arrhythmias, tachyarrhythmias, ventricular arrhythmias. So it's also, you should be very careful of how and when you're prescribing the TCAs. As we have discussed before, if you look at the non-target actions, you would be able to predict the side effects to a greater extent. So with antimuscarinics, you will have dry mouth, you will have constipation, you have worsening of acute angle glaucoma, urinary retention, especially in the elderly who have prostatic hypertrophy. You would be careful and ask in history of the same. At the blockade of the alpha-1 receptors, you would have dizziness, you would have syncope, you would have sedation, all of these associated factors. And then blockade of sodium channels, as we have talked, the heart and the brain, these are the things to be careful about.